Imagine a slow historical drama about medieval court politics, becoming one of the biggest movies in Korean history. Not an action movie, not a romance, not a comedy, but a tragedy about two clowns. The King and the Clown, released in 2005, sold over 12 million tickets in South Korea. At the time, that meant that roughly one out of every four Koreans watched it in theaters. So the question is, why did an art style historical film, which was a genre that was never known as the most popular, become such a mainstream cultural phenomenon? The answer to that question is complex, but it comes down to this. The King and the Clown succeeded not just because of its story, but because it allowed Korean audiences to safely talk about themes like power, masculinity, and social pressure. And they did this by hiding those conversations behind a historical setting. To understand the movie, we need to understand Korea in the early 2000s. South Korea had just gone through extremely fast modernization. In just one generation, it went from post-war poverty to a global economic superpower. But many of its social values, especially respect for hierarchy, authority, and emotional restraint, were still deeply rooted in traditional culture. Society was still status-based, meaning that a person's job, title, age, education, and social rank strongly shaped how others spoke to them and how much influence they had. People were still expected to be emotionally restrained, especially men, and public displays of strong feelings were often suppressed to maintain social harmony and self-control. You respected elders. You didn't criticize authority openly, and especially for men, emotional vulnerability was discouraged. At the same time, the Korean wave, or Hallyu, was beginning. Korean dramas, music, and films were spreading internationally. Korea was starting to think about how it presents itself culturally, and the movie appeared right at that moment. It looks like a story about a 1500s king, but Korean audiences immediately recognized it was a story about modern society. But to understand the cultural significance of the movie, we have to understand the plot. Warning, spoilers ahead. The story follows two traveling street performers. Jang Seng is loud, sarcastic, and rebellious, while Gong Gil is quiet, gentle, and performs female roles because of his delicate appearance. They perform satire skits mocking corrupt officials, which gets them arrested. To avoid execution, they're brought to entertain the real historical king, Yong Sang-gun, a paranoid and emotionally unstable ruler. Unexpectedly, the kings become deeply attached to Gong Gil. Not necessarily romantic, not parental, more like emotionally dependent. This creates a triangle. The king needs Gong Gil emotionally, Jang Seng wants to protect Gong Gil, and the court officials want the clowns dead. As their performances become more truthful and begin mocking the king himself, the palace becomes dangerous. By the end, the king loses control, executions happen, and the palace collapses into chaos, and the story ends tragically, but symbolically, with the clowns performing one last time as everything falls apart. The most important thing to understand: the clowns are not just characters. They represent artists and entertainers in Korean society. In the film, officials cannot criticize the king directly, but clowns can, because they're considered foolish. This reflects a real cultural idea. In hierarchical societies, humor becomes the only safe way to speak the truth. Their plays gradually change from silly jokes to political commentary, and the king laughs, until he realizes that the jokes are about him. The film is suggesting something powerful. When truth can only be spoken as comedy, society is afraid of honesty. And the movie is doing exactly what it shows the clowns doing. The clowns hide their message behind their foolishness of their acts, and the movie hides its message behind the veil of a historical movie. The message comes down to this: a society that punishes honest speech will force truth into performance, and eventually the performance becomes the only place reality can exist. Power fears honesty, and truth survives as performance. Korean audiences recognize this. The movie used history as a safe mask to critique authority without directly attacking modern institutions. But there's a second reason the movie was huge: Gong Gil. At the time, Korean mainstream media rarely showed male softness or emotional vulnerability. Gong Gil is gentle, androgynous, and emotionally expressive. And instead of mocking him, the movie treats him with dignity. This was shocking in 2005. Male audiences sympathized with him, and female audiences connected to him. He became one of the earliest mainstream Korean characters to challenge rigid masculinity norms. The king's attachment to him also matters, as the king is powerful, yet the only person he feels safe with is the least powerful person in the palace, and the least traditionally masculine man. The movie asks, who is actually stronger, the ruler or the person who doesn't need power? Strength isn't always masculine, and softness can be a strength. As we know, the end of the movie shows the palace collapsing into violence, but the final image is the clowns performing again, like they did at the beginning. Why? Because the movie's message is this: power structures fail, kings fall, but storytelling survives. And when the storytelling tells the truth survives. Korean audiences connected deeply to this. The film wasn't just about history. It was about how ordinary people emotionally survive rigid systems through humor, art, and performance. The King and the Clown became successful because it did something rare. It didn't directly criticize modern Korea. It allowed audiences to recognize their own society indirectly. Through satire, masculinity, and emotional repression, the film showed that sometimes the people with the least power are the only ones free to tell the truth. And ironically, the person who needs freedom the most is the king.